The lights of the Charleston Harbor Gala shimmered across the water as Owen Trask finished repairing a winch at the far end of the dock. He wasn't a CEO, a millionaire, or even a guest at the event, just a widowed father trying to build a life for his daughter. Then Marlo Easterbrook, the powerful CEO everyone admired from afar, walked past him. Before he could stop himself, Owen smiled and said, "Whoever ends up with you is going to be a lucky guy." Marlo paused, looked straight into his eyes, and quietly replied, "I was hoping that would be you." Before we continue, tell us in the comments. If you were Owen, what would you have said next? And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay until the end to discover how one unexpected sentence changed 3 lives forever. The morning after the gala arrived, wrapped in a blanket of fog, Charleston Harbor was quiet at dawn. The colorful lights from the previous evening still hung above the docks, swaying gently in the breeze, as if they refused to admit the celebration was over. Most people who had attended the autumn gala were still asleep in their comfortable homes. Owen Trask was already at work. He walked across the damp wooden pier with a toolbox in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. The collar of his work jacket was still wet from the mist. 8 months earlier, he had taken a job at Easterbrook and Company as a carpenter and repairman. Few people knew that years ago, he had been one of the most promising yacht designers in the industry. That life felt very far away now. 4 years earlier, Owen had lost his wife, Diana, after a long illness. Since then, every decision he made revolved around one person, his daughter, Hattie. By 7 o'clock, he was back at their small house in Mount Pleasant. The smell of toast filled the kitchen. Hattie sat at the table in her school uniform, drawing boats on the back of an old envelope. She looked up when he entered. "You came home late," she said. "Had to finish a repair." "Just a repair?" Owen smiled. "Just a repair." She accepted the answer and returned to her drawing. Children often understood more than adults realized, but Hattie had learned not to ask questions her father didn't want to answer. For a moment, Owen stood quietly and watched her. Everything he did was for her. Every long shift, every tired morning, every sacrifice. Because after Diana died, Hattie had become his entire world. Across town, on the 14th floor of Easterbrook Tower, Marlo Easterbrook stood beside a large window overlooking the harbor. Her coffee had gone cold. She barely noticed. The words from the previous night kept replaying in her mind. "Whoever ends up with you is going to be a lucky guy." And then her own reply, "I was hoping that would be you." For years, Marlo had built walls around herself. As CEO of one of the most respected maritime companies on the East Coast, she was used to people wanting something from her: money, influence, contracts, opportunities. Owen had wanted none of those things. That was precisely what made him different. Her chief of staff entered with reports, meeting schedules, and shareholder updates. But Marlo struggled to focus. A special shareholder meeting was approaching. Several board members were pushing for a major sale that could change the future of Easterbrook and Company forever. The pressure was growing, yet somehow, the thing occupying her thoughts most was not the company. It was a widowed carpenter working quietly in the shipyard below. Later that afternoon, she walked down to the yard without announcing her visit. Workers paused respectfully as she passed. She found Owen sanding a wooden joint on a partially restored hull. He noticed her immediately and stood. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The noise of the shipyard continued around them. Gulls cried overhead, engines hummed in the distance, tools clattered against steel, yet everything between them felt strangely still. "I need the repair report for the Bermuda tender," Marlo finally said. "You'll have it tomorrow." She nodded. Neither moved. Neither seemed willing to leave. Finally, Owen cleared his throat. "I shouldn't have said what I said last night." Marlo looked at him for a long moment, then a faint smile appeared. "You think I would have answered if you hadn't?" Before Owen could find a response, she turned and walked away. He watched her disappear between the rows of boats. For the rest of the day, he could not stop thinking about those words, because for the first time in years, something inside him had begun to wake up. something he thought he had buried with his grief. Neither Owen nor Marlo knew it yet, but powerful enemies were already moving behind the scenes. A hidden secret from the past was about to surface. A battle for the future of Easterbrook and Company was about to begin, and before it was over, both of them would be forced to decide what mattered, more protecting their hearts or fighting for the life they truly wanted. If you're enjoying the story so far, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, do you think Owen should give love a second chance after everything he has been through? The next morning, Charleston Harbor woke beneath a layer of silver fog. The wooden docks glistened with moisture from the night air, and the water moved quietly beneath the slips. Most people arriving at Easterbrook and Company saw only another ordinary workday. Owen Trask knew better. Nothing felt ordinary anymore. Not after what Marlo had said. He walked into the workshed before sunrise. The familiar smell of cedar, varnish, and machine oil greeted him. Calder Voss, the yard supervisor, was already there, pouring coffee into 2 battered mugs. Without a word, Calder slid one across the bench. Owen accepted it. Neither man spoke immediately. Calder had known Owen long enough to recognize when something was happening beneath the surface. Finally, he smirked. "You look like a man who slept exactly 3 hours." Owen took a sip of coffee. "Probably 4. "Ah," Calder replied. "So it went well." Owen shook his head. "It didn't go anywhere. That's not what your face says." For the first time that morning, Owen laughed. A short laugh, the kind that surprised even him. Calder noticed. That alone told him everything. For years, Owen had carried grief like an anchor tied around his chest. Ever since Diana died, he had become quieter, more distant. He worked hard. He raised Hattie well, but there had always been something missing from him, something that had disappeared the day he buried his wife. Now, for the first time in a very long while, Calder could see a small crack in that wall, and light was beginning to come through. Across town, Marlo Easterbrook sat alone in her office. The city stretched beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ships moved slowly through the harbor. The morning sun reflected across the water. Yet Marlo's attention remained fixed on a photograph resting on a cabinet near her desk. The picture had been taken 12 years earlier. Her father stood proudly beside a newly launched yacht. A younger Marlo stood next to him. Both were smiling. Every time she looked at the photograph, she remembered that day. And every time she remembered that day, she remembered one other thing. The yacht. The vessel that had changed the future of Easterbrook and Company. The yacht called Hyan. Her father had once described it as the most beautiful design the company had ever produced. But he had never spoken much about the designer. At the time, Marlo assumed it was simply another talented employee. Now she wasn't so sure, because over the past few days, she had begun hearing the same name again and again. Owen Trask, the quiet carpenter working in her shipyard, the widowed father who fixed hulls and repaired equipment, the man who somehow seemed completely uninterested in impressing anyone. Something about the story didn't fit, and Marlo intended to find out why. Shortly after noon, she drove to the yard. No assistants, no appointments, no announcements, just questions. The workers respectfully stepped aside as she crossed the shipyard. She passed rows of vessels under repair, stacks of lumber, cranes, workshops. Finally, she found Owen inside one of the older storage buildings near the back of the property. The massive doors stood open. Dust floated through beams of sunlight. Several aging company-owned hulls rested inside like sleeping giants. Owen was kneeling beside one of them, inspecting a section of timber. He looked up as she approached. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Marlo asked the question directly. "Did you design Hyan?" The silence that followed felt strangely heavy. Owen slowly stood. His expression didn't change. Yes, one word, nothing more. Yet somehow, that single word changed everything. Marlo stared at him. "You designed it?" "Yes. My father chose you." "He did." The realization hit her harder than she expected. For years, she had admired that yacht. For years, she had listened to her father praise the craftsmanship behind it, and all that time, the man responsible had been standing quietly in her own shipyard, unknown, unrecognized, hidden in plain sight. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why did you leave?" Owen looked toward the open doorway, toward the harbor beyond. When he answered, his voice remained calm. "My wife got sick." Marlo said nothing. "My career stopped mattering." The words were simple, but the pain behind them was unmistakable. Owen continued, "We came home. I spent 18 months taking care of her." The storage building suddenly felt quieter. Even the distant sounds of the shipyard seemed to fade. "After she died," Owen said softly, "I walked into my studio and looked at my drafting table." He paused. "I realized I didn't want to draw another line." Marlo felt her chest tighten, because she understood exactly what he meant. Not the loss itself, but the emptiness, the feeling that something essential had been taken away. "So you just walked away?" Owen nodded. "Yes." "From everything?" "From everything." For several moments, neither spoke. Dust drifted through the sunlight. Outside, seagulls cried above the harbor. Marlo sat on a coil of rope nearby. Her thoughts were racing. All those years, all that talent, all that potential. Gone. Not because of failure, not because of fear, but because of love, because one man had chosen his family over his ambition, and somehow that made her respect him even more. Finally, she asked another question. "Why come back here?" Owen glanced toward the old hull beside him. A faint smile appeared. "Because this harbor feels like home." He rested one hand against the weathered wood. "And because some things are worth preserving." Marlo followed his gaze. For the first time, she realized he wasn't talking only about boats. He was talking about memories, about family, about legacy, about the things people leave behind. And suddenly, she understood why her father had trusted him. More than that, she understood why she was beginning to trust him too. Neither of them noticed the danger growing elsewhere. Several floors above, inside a private office overlooking the harbor, Royce Stannard was studying financial reports and shareholder projections. A locked envelope sat inside his desk drawer, an envelope containing a secret capable of changing everything. Royce stared at it for several seconds before closing the drawer. Then he picked up his phone. "Move the shareholder meeting forward," he said. His voice was cold. 2 weeks is too long. As he ended the call, a small smile appeared on his face. The game was already beginning, and neither Owen nor Marlo yet understood how much they were about to lose, or how much they would have to fight to protect. For the next several days, neither Owen nor Marlo mentioned what had happened inside the storage building, but neither of them could forget it. Something had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that every conversation felt different. Every glance lasted a little longer. Every silence carried a little more meaning. Owen returned to his normal routine. He repaired damaged hulls, replaced worn rigging, supervised maintenance crews. He focused on work because work was simple. Work made sense. Feelings did not. At home, Hattie noticed the difference almost immediately. Children always did. One evening she sat at the kitchen table, coloring a sailboat, while Owen prepared dinner. Without looking up, she asked casually, "Is Marlo pretty?" Owen nearly dropped the pan. "What?" Hattie continued coloring. "Miss Marlo." He stared at her. "Where did that come from?" She shrugged. "You smile when people say her name." Owen laughed nervously. "I do not." "You do." "I don't." "You do." The conversation ended there. But later that night, after Hattie had gone to bed, Owen found himself standing alone on the back porch, staring across the marsh. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to admit the truth. Hattie was right. He did smile when he thought about Marlo. That realization both comforted and frightened him, because the last person he had loved was Diana, and losing Diana had nearly destroyed him. Part of him wondered if opening his heart again was worth the risk. Another part already knew the answer. Meanwhile, Marlo found herself spending more time at the shipyard than anyone considered necessary. Officially, She was inspecting operations, reviewing restoration projects, checking schedules, meeting clients. Unofficially, she was looking for excuses to see Owen, not because she needed him, because she wanted to. The distinction mattered. One afternoon, she watched him from across the yard while he worked on an older vessel. There was nothing particularly remarkable about the scene. No dramatic speeches, no grand gestures. Just Owen focused entirely on his work. Passion. Steady, reliable. The kind of man who fixed things because they needed fixing. The kind of man who never asked for recognition afterward. Her father had once admired exactly that quality. Now she understood why. 3 days later, an email arrived in Owen's inbox. The sender was Marlo Easterbrook. The message contained only 3 short sentences. A client in Bermuda wanted a custom yacht tender. She wanted Owen's opinion on the design requirements. Could he come to her office at 2 o'clock? Owen read the email 3 times. Then he sighed, because he knew this meeting wasn't really about a yacht. At precisely 2 o'clock, he stepped into Marlo's office. The harbor stretched behind her windows. Sunlight danced across the water below. Marlo wasn't sitting behind her desk. Instead, she sat in one of the chairs beside the window. A second chair waited opposite her. "Sit down," she said softly. "Owen's at." For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Marlo placed a folder on the small table between them. She didn't open it. "This isn't about the Bermuda project." Owen had expected that. "What is it about?" Marlo looked directly at him. "I want to know if you'll ever come back." The question hung between them. He already knew what she meant. Not back to the yard, back to designing, back to the future he had abandoned, back to the life he once loved. Owen looked away toward the harbor. A pilot boat moved across the water. The sight reminded him of another time, another version of himself, a younger man with plans, dreams, ambition. Then Diana got sick, and everything changed. When he finally answered, his voice was quiet. "I don't know." Marlo waited patiently. "I haven't drawn anything in 4 years." The confession surprised even him. Not one line. Marlo remained silent. At last, he turned toward her. "I'm afraid." The words felt strange, honest, painfully honest. "If I start again," he continued, "I'll find out whether I still love it. And if you don't, then I'll lose the last piece of who I used to be." Marlo's expression softened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she replied, "Thank you for telling me." No advice, no pressure, no attempt to convince him, just understanding. Somehow that meant more than anything else she could have said. Before either could continue, a knock interrupted them. Marlo's chief of staff entered. His expression looked concerned. "Owen, your daughter's school has been trying to reach you." Owen immediately stood. My phone was off. A moment later, he saw Hattie standing in the reception area. Small backpack, school uniform, permission slip, clutched tightly in both hands. Relief washed over him. Before he could reach her, Marlo walked forward and crouched beside the little girl. "I'm Marlo," she said warmly. "Hattie." The two shook hands, and something unexpected happened. Hattie smiled, not a polite smile, a genuine one. The kind children only give people they instinctively trust. Owen noticed it. So did Marlo. Neither commented, but neither forgot. That evening, the weather changed. A tropical storm shifted unexpectedly toward Charleston. By sunset, emergency marine warnings covered the entire harbor. Winds were expected to reach dangerous levels before midnight. At Easterbrook shipyard, emergency preparations began immediately. Workers rushed to secure vessels. Extra mooring lines were installed. Equipment was moved indoors. Tarps were reinforced. Owen stayed. There was too much at risk to leave. Rain began shortly after 7. By 8 o'clock, powerful gusts swept across the docks. Then, headlights appeared. A vehicle pulled into the yard. Owen looked up. Marlo stepped out wearing foul-weather gear and work boots. Without a word, she grabbed a rope and joined the crew. No speeches, no executive authority, no special treatment, just work. For hours, they fought the storm together. Rain hammered the harbor. Waves slammed against the docks. Wind screamed through rigging. Still, They worked. Si, busai. Boat after boat, line after line, protecting the company her father built, protecting the harbor they both loved. At one point, standing on opposite sides of a rain-soaked deck, they looked at each other through the darkness. Neither looked away, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some things were becoming impossible to ignore. By 1 o'clock in the morning, the storm finally moved north. The harbor survived. The yard remained intact. Exhausted workers gathered in the main shed drinking hot coffee. Marlo sat beside Owen on a wooden bench. Her hair was soaked. Her hands were scratched from ropes. Her face showed pure exhaustion. And yet she looked happier than she had in weeks. For the first time, Owen realized something important. Marlo Easterbrook wasn't simply the CEO of Easterbrook and Company. She was someone willing to stand in the rain and fight beside her people when things became difficult. Someone who carried responsibility without complaining. Someone who understood loyalty. Someone who understood loss. And perhaps someone worth risking his heart for. Before we continue to Chapter 3, tell us in the comments. Do you think Owen should finally give himself permission to love again? Or is he moving too fast after everything he has been through? If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us because a hidden secret from Marlo's father is about to change everything. The storm passed, but the calm that followed did not last. 3 days later, Charleston woke to a different kind of pressure. Not wind, not rain, rumors. An article published in the Charleston Business Journal spread quickly through local business circles. The report suggested that Marlo Easterbrook had become personally involved with a shipyard employee during a sensitive corporate negotiation period. The article never mentioned Owen by name. It didn't need to. Inside Easterbrook and Company, everyone knew who the article was about. Marlo read the report from her office. Her jaw tightened. She hated gossip. She hated manipulation even more. Someone wanted to damage her credibility before the upcoming shareholder meeting. Someone wanted the board to question her judgment, and she had a strong suspicion who that someone might be. Royce Stannard. For years, Royce had served as chairman of the board, and one of the most The next morning, Owen arrived at the shipyard before sunrise. The harbor was quiet. A thin layer of mist drifted across the water, softening the outlines of boats and docks. Normally, mornings like this brought him peace. Not today. Today, he carried the weight of what Marlo had discovered. The trust, the shares, the letter from her father, most of all, the knowledge that Royce Stannard had hidden the truth for years. Calder was already waiting in the workshed. Without a word, he handed Owen a cup of coffee. "You know now?" Calder asked. Owen nodded. "I know." "And?" Owen looked out toward the harbor. "For Henry, I'll take the voting rights." A faint smile appeared on Calder's face. "Good." Neither man needed to say more. They both understood what was at stake. This was no longer just about ownership. It was about protecting a legacy. A company built by people who cared about craftsmanship, loyalty, and integrity. A company Henry Easterbrook had trusted them to preserve. Later that afternoon, Owen met Marlo in the conference room, overlooking Charleston Harbor. Stacks of financial reports covered the table, shareholder records, revenue forecasts, legal documents. The battle ahead would not be won with emotions. It would be won with facts. For hours, they worked side by side. Marlo explained the numbers. Owen outlined a vision for the future. Instead of selling Easterbrook and Company, they proposed reopening the design division, restoring the company's reputation for innovation, and creating new jobs while protecting existing ones. For the first time in years, Owen found himself talking about boat design again, not as a memory, not as a regret, as a future. Marlo noticed the change immediately. The passion in his voice had returned. The spark that grief had buried was beginning to come back to life. As evening settled over the harbor, they finally pushed their chairs back from the table. The shareholder meeting was only days away. Nothing was guaranteed. Royce still held enormous influence. The outcome remained uncertain, but one thing had changed. Neither of them was fighting alone anymore. As the lights of Charleston reflected across the dark water outside, Marlo looked at Owen and smiled. "We're ready." Owen returned the smile. "Then let's win." Neither of them realized that before the week was over, the truth Royce had spent years hiding would be exposed in front of everyone, and the future of Easterbrook and Company would be decided once and for all. Friday morning arrived with a tension that could be felt throughout Easterbrook headquarters. The special shareholder meeting would determine the future of the company. Inside the 15th floor conference room, 11 shareholders took their seats around a long, polished table. Attorneys, advisors, and board members lined the walls. At the head of the room sat Royce Stannard, confident, calm, certain he had already won. For years, Royce had quietly positioned himself as the most powerful man in the company. Today was supposed to be the final step. Once the shareholders approved the sale proposal, control of Easterbrook and Company would effectively pass into new hands. Royce stood and began his presentation. Charts, financial projections, revenue forecasts. Every number seemed to support the sale. By the time he finished, several shareholders appeared convinced. Then Royce delivered his final blow. A slide appeared referencing recent rumors involving Marlo and a shipyard employee. The implication was clear. Marlo's judgment could no longer be trusted. The room grew quiet. Royce believed he had cornered her. What he didn't know was that Marlo had come prepared. She slowly rose from her chair. Without anger, without drama, without fear, she walked to the front of the room, carrying 3 documents. The first was her father's trust agreement. The second was his handwritten letter. The third was something Royce never expected anyone to find: his own email. Marlo placed the documents beneath the projector and began reading. First, the trust agreement. The room immediately became silent. Several shareholders exchanged shocked glances. Then she read her father's letter aloud. Every word carried the weight of a man's final wishes. Henry Easterbrook had personally chosen Owen Tross to protect the company's future. Not because Owen was wealthy, not because he was powerful, because he was honest, because he valued integrity over profit, because Henry trusted him more than anyone else. When Marlo finished reading, she revealed the final document: Royce's email. A message sent years earlier instructing attorneys to delay notifying Owen about the trust, possibly forever. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The silence felt deafening. An older shareholder named Peter Benton finally leaned forward. His voice was low. "Royce, tell me this is not what it looks like." Royce opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in years, he had no answer. The room had already reached its conclusion. The truth was undeniable. Royce had hidden the wishes of the company's founder, and he had done it for his own benefit. Then Owen stood. The room turned toward him. He wasn't a board member. He wasn't a corporate executive. He was simply a widowed father who loved boats. But for the next several minutes, everyone listened. Owen presented a different future, a future where Easterbrook remained independent, a future where the design division reopened, a future where jobs were protected instead of sold, a future worthy of Henry Easterbrook's legacy. When he finished, the shareholders voted. On. The numbers appeared. Marlo's shares, Owen's trust shares, Peter Benton's shares, then more and more, until the result became clear. The sale proposal had failed. Easterbrook and Company would remain in the hands of the people who truly cared about it. Moments later, a second vote was called. This time, the decision was unanimous. Royce Stannard was removed as chairman effective immediately. As Royce quietly gathered his papers and walked out of the conference room, no one stopped him. 30 years of influence had collapsed in a single morning. Meanwhile, across the room, Marlo looked toward Owen. For years, her father had trusted him. Today, everyone finally understood why. But neither Marlo nor Owen realized that the hardest decision still remained ahead. Not about the company, but about the future they might finally build together. 6 weeks later, Charleston Harbor looked completely different. The storm had long passed. The shareholder battle was over. The sale proposal had been defeated, and for the first time in years, Easterbrook and Company had a future everyone could believe in. The design division would officially reopen in February. Workers who had feared losing their jobs were staying. New projects were already being discussed. The uncertainty that had haunted the shipyard was finally beginning to fade. But perhaps the greatest changes had happened in quieter places. Places no shareholder meeting could ever reach. Places inside people's hearts. That Saturday morning, the harbor woke beneath a clear blue sky. A light breeze drifted across the water. The conditions were perfect for sailing. At the shipyard, a small crowd gathered around a familiar vessel. Heian, the yacht that had started everything. The yacht Owen had designed when he was 27 years old. The yacht Henry Easterbrook had loved. The yacht that had spent years hidden beneath a tarp waiting for someone to believe in it again. Today, Heian was returning to the water. There were no reporters, no television cameras, no corporate speeches, just friends, family, and the people who cared about the boat. Calder stood with his arms crossed, watching proudly. Several shipyard workers gathered nearby. Marlo stood beside Owen and Hattie near the launch ramp. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Owen handed a piece of chalk to his daughter. Hattie looked confused. "What do I do with this?" Owen smiled. "It is an old tradition." He knelt beside her. "The designer marks the hull before launch." Hattie considered this seriously. "But I didn't design it." "No," Owen replied softly, "but you helped save it." Her eyes widened. Slowly, she crouched beside the keel. After thinking for a moment, she carefully wrote 4 small words. Hattie was here. The workers laughed. Calder wiped a hand across his face and pretended something had gotten into his eye. Owen looked at the message, then at his daughter, and for the first time in years, he felt something he once thought he had lost forever. Peace. Not because life was perfect, not because the pain of losing Diana had disappeared. It never would, but because he finally understood something important. Moving forward did not mean leaving the past behind. It meant carrying it with you while continuing to live, continuing to love, continuing to hope. A few minutes later, Heian slipped gracefully into the water. The launch was flawless. The yacht floated exactly as she had 12 years earlier. Strong, beautiful, timeless, just as Owen had imagined when he first drew her lines. Soon afterward, the 3 of them climbed aboard. Owen took the helm. Marlo stood beside him. Hattie settled near the bow, excitedly watching the harbor pass by. The wind filled the sails. The yacht began moving smoothly through the water. For a while, nobody said much. They didn't need to. The harbor itself seemed to speak. The gentle splash against the hull, the creaking of rigging, the cry of distant gulls, the steady breeze filling the sails. All of it felt like a new beginning. As they sailed past Fort Sumter, Hattie suddenly turned around. "Dad?" Owen smiled. "Yes?" She pointed toward Marlo. "Is she coming sailing with us again?" For a brief moment, Owen and Marlo exchanged glances. Then Owen looked back toward the horizon. "I hope so." Marlo laughed softly, the kind of laugh that came from deep inside. Not forced, not careful, not guarded, just happy. She placed one hand lightly on the rail. "I will." Hattie nodded, as if the answer had been obvious all along. Then she returned to watching the water. Neither Owen nor Marlo noticed her smiling to herself. Children often understood things before adults did. The afternoon passed peacefully. No urgent meetings, no boardroom battles, no secrets, no headlines. Just 3 people enjoying a beautiful day on the water. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, Owen found himself looking around the boat. At Hattie, at Marlo, at the harbor stretching endlessly before them. 4 years earlier, he had believed his story was over. He thought grief had written the final chapter. He thought happiness belonged to another life, a life he could never return to. But he had been wrong. Life had surprised him. Healing had arrived when he least expected it, not through dramatic miracles, not through sudden success, but through small moments, a conversation, a friendship, a shared struggle, a second chance, The kind of second chance many people stop believing in. Standing beside him, Marlo looked out across the water. The wind moved gently through her hair. For years, she had carried responsibility alone. For years, she had fought every battle by herself. Today felt different. Not because her problems had vanished, but because she no longer carried them alone. Somewhere behind them, the shipyard continued its work. Ahead of them, the open harbor stretched toward the horizon, and between those two worlds stood the future they were building together. One careful step at a time. One honest choice at a time. One day at a time. The wind remained steady. The sails stayed full. The harbor sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. And for the first time in a very long while, everything felt exactly as it should. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If Owen's journey touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us. Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance at happiness? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next inspiring story. And remember, sometimes the life you think you've lost forever is simply waiting for the right moment to begin again.